Hey there. Tonight, we're not chasing emperors or recounting epic wars. We're slipping behind the curtain, into the flicker of torchlight, the hush before the first line, the ancient hush of stories waiting to be told. This isn't about glory or conquest. It's about what people once whispered into masks, and what those masks whispered back. It's about stages carved into hillsides, shadows dancing on linen screens, voices echoing through temple courts. Long before Netflix, before novels, before even the word theater meant anything at all, humans were already pretending, performing, and remembering. So if these slow, candlelit corners of history bring you peace, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy drifting off this way. And in the comments, tell me what time it is for you, and where you're listening from. I love knowing who else is out there, falling asleep to the same ancient echoes. Now dim the lights. Let the noise of the day slip quietly away. And step into a time where stories weren't watched, they were lived. Because tonight, the curtain doesn't rise. It rustles gently in the wind. And we begin. Close your eyes. And let the centuries unfold. They say you can hear a jester before you see him. Not because he sings, though sometimes he must, but because the bells stitched to his hat never stop ringing. A walking wind chime of humiliation, always approaching. Always performing. Picture a medieval great hall at dusk. Long tables of stained oak sag beneath trenchers and bones. Tallow candles weep down iron sconces. The air is thick with roasted meat, spilt wine, wet wool, and boredom, the dangerous kind that turns kings cruel. The nobles lounge like cats fat on conquest, their laughter shallow, their appetites deeper than the platters can fill. And into this room walks a man whose job is to fix the mood before it darkens into bloodshed. He grins wide and skips forward with a bow so deep, his hat bells kiss the floor. He is the jester. And he is not laughing. To most modern eyes, he's a curiosity, the clown in history's margins. But in his time, he was both ornament and omen. A man required to speak when others dared not. To fill silences, to diffuse tempers, to entertain the powerful not because he wished to, but because his life depended on it. You didn't choose to become a fool. No one did. It was chosen for you, like the plague, or exile, or being born with a limp. You were plucked from obscurity by chance, accident, or cruelty. Maybe you slipped in the mud during a fair and made a lord laugh. Maybe your tongue was too sharp for your village priest, and someone with a title thought you'd be better used amusing royalty than swinging from a rope. Sometimes, you were bought. Like a falcon or a lute. If your face was strange or your voice pleasing, you might be traded between noble households, a gift of mirth wrapped in mockery. Other times, you were dragged from a crowd and told to dance, and when you did, they kept you. Because you were amusing. Because you were different. Because someone with power said so. And from that moment on, you were theirs. Your new life came with no training, no contract, and no escape. You were not just expected to be funny. You were expected to be available. Always. Morning, midnight, mealtime, war council, if the king scowled, someone came knocking. Summon the fool, they'd say. And you, stomach empty or head pounding, would stumble in and perform. Not because you wanted to. Because you had to. Your room, if one could call it that, lay somewhere between the scullery and the broom closet. Drafty, cramped, and often shared with sacks of flour or broken chairs. Your meals came after the dogs were fed, and your clothes, bright, clashing, humiliating, were sewn from scraps. You were meant to stand out. Not like a star. Like a warning. And the bells, always the bells. Sewn into your sleeves, your shoes, your cap, so that your presence could never go unnoticed. Every step a sound. Every movement a reminder. You are not one of them. You are not a man. You are a fixture. A jester. To survive, you became a chameleon. You learned how to read a room faster than a priest reads a psalm. You memorized everyone's expressions, every twitch of the king's eye, every shift in the queen's lips. You knew when laughter was safe and when silence meant danger. You mastered the art of doublespeak, couching hard truths in rhymes, insults in song. You juggled knives and jokes alike, each one a potential execution. Because the line between comedy and offense in a medieval court is not a line at all. It's a thread. And it moves. A jest that earns applause on Monday might earn you a whipping on Tuesday, or worse, a shallow grave by Thursday. Mock the bishop too plainly, and it's blasphemy. Mock the baron's baldness, and it's treason. But wrap it in a riddle, veil it in a dance, couch it in metaphor, and they'll laugh. Maybe. Unless they don't. And God's help you if they don't. Because there's no human resources department in the court. No warnings. No appeals. Fail to amuse the wrong man on the wrong day, and you'll find yourself in the stocks by morning, or dragged out with a new fool waiting behind you in line. And even when you're not on stage, you're performing. Walking through the great hall. Strut. Crossing the queen's path. Wink, twirl, bow. Sit too quietly in a corner. Why isn't the fool being foolish, they'll say. Is he sick? Mad? Planning treason? You are a man without privacy, without peace, without permission to simply be. You are always being watched. Always expected to smile. Even your emotions are borrowed. Feel joy, but not too much, you might distract. Feel sadness? That's uncomfortable. Feel anger? That's dangerous. Grieve? Who cares? Laugh harder. Dance longer. Be the fool, fool. Because the court's amusement is more important than your humanity. And over time, the mask becomes you. You forget what silence feels like. You forget how to cry. Your jokes become instinct, your smile a muscle memory, your thoughts edited before they ever reach your tongue. You become the costume. You become the echo. You become what they expect, and nothing more. Because in a world where power is sharp and mercy rare, being a fool isn't about being funny. It's about being necessary. And necessary things are rarely cherished. The jester wakes before the kitchens. Not because he's eager, but because someone might need to see him looking ridiculous before breakfast. That, or he's been summoned already, dragged from sleep by a red-faced steward whispering, "The king's in a mood." That phrase carries weight. The mood of a monarch can kill. And so, with crusted eyes and aching joints, he pulls on his bells, his patchwork shame, and shuffles toward duty. Even in silence, he jingles. To be a jester is to never stop performing. There are no hours, no respite, no curtain to fall. You are on display from the moment you appear in court until the moment you're replaced, buried, or forgotten, and sometimes, those come in the same week. Your every gesture, every line, must entertain. Not just once, but always. Not just the crowd, but the individual. Not just the king, but his cousin, his priest, his pet falcon if it seems upset. And the content must be new. God forbid you repeat a joke. The witty poem that delighted a noble last week will earn a scowl if delivered again. Originality is your currency, and you're expected to mint it endlessly. A new pun about taxes. A biting impersonation of a rival courtier. A satire of the bishop's sermon disguised as a dance. All delivered with enough cleverness to amuse, and enough restraint to survive. But don't go too far. There are topics even a fool must fear: royal lineage, war failures, the queen's weight, the king's ailments, religion if spoken plainly, and politics if spoken truthfully. If you must mock, disguise it. Say the rooster with too many wives grows thin by winter. Say the ox that spends too long with the goats forgets how to pull a cart. Say anything, as long as they laugh and don't think too hard. Because if they think too hard, they might realize what you're really saying. And that's when things get dangerous. You see, you live in the palace, but not like a prince. Your chamber, if you're lucky, is an abandoned storage room between the pantries. A low-ceilinged box that smells of old carrots and worse decisions. You sleep on sacks, curled beside mice. The nobles drink from silver, you drink what's left in cracked clay. They eat first, then their dogs, then you. And yet you are expected to glow. You orbit their meals like a jingly moon, circling the long tables with jokes, impressions, balancing acts, and improvised poetry. They pull you close, then mock you to your face. You are both guest and garnish, consumed and discarded by the end of every feast. And the worst indignities don't come from cruelty. They come from indifference. You juggle knives. They yawn. You sing. They ask when you'll be funny. You recite a satirical verse in 5 parts and 4 languages, and a bored count tosses a chicken bone at your head and says, "Do the silly voice again." No one asks if you're tired. No one asks if you're well. Because they don't see a person. They see a function. You are not the jester. You are our jester. A pet with performance demands. A mascot with mandatory mirth. If the hunting party failed, if the wine shipment spoiled, if the weather turned poor and the king is brooding, you are summoned. Do something amusing, they'll say. And you do. Because the alternative is silence. And silence is dangerous. Silence draws attention. And attention, when it lingers on the fool, is rarely kind. So you twirl. You rhyme. You mock the baron's lazy eye. You slap yourself, fall on your back, and grin like a lunatic. You force yourself to be so animated, so exaggerated, that they forget to notice how tired you are. Because no one cares what the fool feels. Not really. You could be grieving. You could be sick. You could be unraveling. But as long as your bells ring and your voice carries, they'll never stop to ask. The jester doesn't have the luxury of moods. You're not allowed sorrow. not allowed rage. Not even stillness. Every emotion you feel must be filtered, polished, and painted as humor. Even your heartbreak must come with a punchline. Even your humiliation must be worn like armor. You begin to wonder, who were you before the bells? Before the grin became permanent? You used to have a name, perhaps. A past. A mother. But now, you're the fool, and that identity swallows everything. You can't even trust laughter anymore. Sometimes they laugh because they're delighted. Other times, because they're cruel. And the worst is when they laugh too loudly, the kind of laughter that demands you keep going, even as you flounder. Even as you bleed. Because the jest isn't funny anymore. It's you that's become the joke. And when the joke stops being fun, when the room quiets, and someone mutters, "He's losing his touch," that's when the real fear begins. Because you can't afford to fade. You can't afford to bore. You are one bad night from being replaced. And they will replace you. They always do. In the medieval court, humor is a weapon. But the blade isn't held by the jester. It's pressed against his own throat. The fool's job is to speak the unspeakable, to mock what others only dare whisper. He is expected to insult dukes, parody queens, even rib the church itself. But never too harshly. Never too directly. And never when the wrong person is listening. Because the line between bravery and stupidity is razor thin when the room holds men who can order your death before dessert. You are meant to tease power. Not challenge it. Mock the baron's fourth wife, but not his fifth, she's in the room. Joke about the king's gout, but veil it in a farm animal metaphor. Laugh at the bishop's appetite, but add a dancing chicken and 3 verses of rhyme. Wrap every barb in silk, soften every blow with bells. You are the only one allowed to call the emperor naked, but you'd better do it while juggling and wearing a duck on your head. And even then, it's a gamble. Because what made them laugh yesterday might make them furious today. The queen might find your satire about her cousin's gambling hilarious, until her cousin arrives at court, and suddenly you're accused of slander. The king might chuckle at your imitation of his advisor's wheeze, until he learns that same advisor is funding a war. Now your joke is treason. And once you're branded a threat, it doesn't matter how clever your punchlines are. You're not the jester anymore. You're the fool who overstepped. And the line you overstepped? It moves. There are no written rules. No warnings. Just glances. Shifts in posture. A tightening of the jaw. You have to feel the air in the room like a hunter tracks wind. Read expressions the way a thief reads shadows. One wrong pause, one glance too long at the wrong noble, and you're not entertaining, you're suspicious. And suspicion is fatal. Some fools manage to master the art of truth through absurdity. They couched their criticism in riddles, spoke in animal parables, disguised mockery in metaphors so layered no one could claim to understand them, not out loud, at least. But even that wasn't safe. Because even a riddle can be seen as rebellion if it strikes too close to home. The rooster with the sharp tongue and no eggs should crow less, you say, hoping the king laughs. But if he's in a foul mood, no pun survives the sword. There are stories of jesters whipped, exiled, hanged. Not for failing to be funny, but for being too true. Too perceptive. too good. And that's the cruel irony: the better you are at your job, the closer you dance to death. Because real wit reveals. And revelation is dangerous. In a room full of masks, the jester's grin is the only one expected to stay in place, no matter what it conceals. But behind that grin, you are watching. Listening. Always. You are the one nobody guards their words around, because they don't believe you matter. You are harmless, they think. A living joke. A wind-up mouth with no memory. They forget, fools remember everything. You hear the gossip between maids and knights. You hear which noble is plotting against which, who's in bed with whom, what marriage is falling apart, what alliance is being forged in secret. You hear the plans no one says aloud, until they're half drunk, half laughing, and think you're too simple to understand. But you do understand. And knowledge is a dangerous currency. If you know too little, you're useless. If you know too much, you're a threat. So you learn to speak in fragments. Hints. Laughter that sounds like confession. You speak in riddles, so you can deny everything. You imply, you allude, you pantomime. And you pray they keep laughing. Because when they stop laughing, they start noticing. And once they notice, the danger begins. You are not protected. You are not clergy. You are not noble. You are not even servant. You are a category unto yourself, privileged, yes, but only so long as you amuse. Your license to speak is nothing more than a paper crown. And the moment it tears, no one will save you. Some courts keep jesters for decades, until they're old and wheezing. Others discard them after a single joke goes wrong. The unlucky ones are flogged. The clever ones exiled. The rest simply vanish, replaced the next morning, their names never mentioned again. The jest continues. But the jester does not. So you learn to measure your words as carefully as your steps. You learn which noble can take a joke and which cannot. You learn to read the mood of the court like sailors read clouds, always watching for storms. And when the storm comes, you laugh louder. You make yourself harmless. You make them forget. Because in a world where truth is treason and silence is suspicion, the only way to survive is to become the joke so thoroughly, so convincingly, that no one suspects you could ever mean more. Even if you do. Especially if you do. Before you speak, they're already laughing. Not at your wit. Not your timing. At your outfit. A jester's costume is a joke in itself, loud, clashing, absurd. It's not sewn for dignity, it's tailored for derision. The moment you enter the hall, every eye is on you, and every eye expects the same thing: foolishness. You could recite Ovid or impersonate a goat, doesn't matter. You're already hilarious by appearance alone. It begins with the hat. The coif, the coxcomb, the fool's cap, call it what you like. It's a twisted monstrosity. Horned, flopping, stitched in garish reds and yellows, with bells at the tips that tinkle with every move. They weren't sewn for music. They were sewn for warning, so everyone hears you coming. You're not allowed to arrive quietly. You're a walking punchline, announced by sound. Your tunic is a patchwork horror, colors no tailor would dare combine on purpose. Mismatched sleeves, clashing panels, hemmed in haste. blue against green, yellow against blood red. And always filthy. Always fraying. You look like someone stole the banners from 5 enemy armies and stitched them together in the dark. Even your shoes are a mockery, curled at the toe like a fairy tale goblin, stitched with bells that jingle every time you shift your weight. You can't sneak. You can't blend in. You are designed to be seen, laughed at, and never taken seriously. But worst of all is the belt. Sometimes oversized, sometimes knotted like a joke in rope form, rarely useful, never practical. It binds nothing. It carries nothing. You wear it only because it completes the image, the fool, trussed and ringing like a church on feast day. And unlike the nobles, dressed in velvet and silk, furs and pearls, your fabrics are the cheapest wool, the itchiest linen. Stained. Heavy. Reused. Your discomfort is part of the joke. The more miserable you feel, the funnier you look. Because your clothes aren't just a costume. They're a cage. They say who you are before you can say anything else. They strip you of mystery, of subtlety, of humanity. They mark you as a thing. A visual gag. A court-approved mockery. Even when you stand still, even when you feel nothing, you look like a man made to stumble. And you wear it all. Every day. No variation. No wardrobe changes. There's no formal fool attire versus casual fool attire. You're not invited to feasts, you are the feast, for their eyes, their jests, their temporary amusement. And don't expect compliments. No one says, "Fine stitching." They say, "Don't trip on your bells today." Or worse, they tug your sleeve as you pass just to hear you jingle, like a holiday decoration with abandonment issues. It becomes part of you. At first, the costume itches. Then it chafes. Then you forget how it feels to wear anything else. Eventually, you forget what it's like to be looked at and not laughed at. You stop remembering your reflection, not the one in polished metal, but the one from before the bells. You don't see yourself anymore. You see what they see. And what they see is hilarious. So you become it. You learn to curtsy ironically. You dance like your joints are on fire and your mind isn't. You flinch dramatically when someone sneers, because it keeps them from sneering harder. You make fun of your own crooked nose before anyone else can. Because if the fool mocks himself, the room laughs with him. If they mock first, they laugh at him. And that distinction, that tiny, invisible line, is everything. You see, laughter isn't just entertainment in court. It's control. It's politics. It's safety. The nobles can't insult each other, not directly. But they can insult you. They can make a joke that sounds like a jab at another lord, but direct it through you like a ventriloquist's puppet. And when the room snickers, they can deny everything. "I wasn't mocking the Duke's stutter," they say. "The fool said it." You didn't. Not really. But you wear the costume. And that makes you the scapegoat. When tensions run high, you're the valve. When tempers flare, you're the target. You absorb the slaps, the thrown bones, the cruel jokes. You make light of everything because if you don't, the darkness spreads to someone who matters. And if the king is having a bad day, that's on you. The roast was cold. why didn't the jester warm the room? The queen scowled at the priest. Maybe the fool made a joke in poor taste. The royal dog barked during vespers. Has the fool been agitating the animals again? You are responsible for everything and thanked for nothing. Your success is silence. Your failure is spectacle. And even when you succeed, someone else gets the credit. The kings laugh. He's in good spirits today, they'll say. Not, the fool brightened his mood. No. That would suggest you're useful. Valuable. Dangerous. Better you remain amusing. Unthreatening. Forgettable. Because once the laughter fades and the feast ends and the hall clears, there you are, still in the same clothes, still ringing when you move, still humming the rhyme that made them spit wine 2 hours ago. Alone. Behind the scenes. Beside the scullery. Wearing the joke. Being the joke. Until tomorrow. You sleep under the same roof as kings, barons, bishops. But you are not one of them. You are something else entirely, present in every room, but owned by none. You are more than servant, less than noble, somewhere between pet and shadow. The court tolerates your presence the way it tolerates cracked flagstones or echoing drafts. You exist, loud and absurd, and no one ever quite knows what to do with you when you're not performing. Your room, if you have one, is a narrow closet tucked between the scullery and the kennels, close enough to hear nobles laugh through the feast hall walls, but never close enough to be invited in. Sometimes you sleep on flour sacks. Sometimes not at all. The jester is expected to be available. Morning, night, after the meal, before the duel, any time the mood needs lifting, you're summoned. And you always go. Because refusing is not an option. At meals, you don't sit. You hover. You orbit the table like a candle fly, annoying, necessary, fragile. You're allowed to speak, but not too much. You're allowed to eat, but only after the nobles, the clergy, the dogs, and the stable boys. You get what's left, the bone with the meat gnawed clean, the bread already torn. You smile as you eat it, because they're watching. Always watching. Because your job, officially, never ends. Even when you're not performing, you're expected to be ready. That means jokes on command. Impressions when requested. Twirls and shrugs and snide quips the moment anyone looks bored or sad or angry. Even if you're alone in the corridor, passing a guard or servant, you're still the jester. They'll say, "Why so serious, fool?" Or, "Come now, dance for us." Or simply, "Do something funny." And you will. Because silence is suspicious. Stillness is dangerous. If the fool is quiet, something must be wrong. And in a world where wrongness must always be blamed on someone, it's never the bishop, or the general, or the highborn girl who insulted the cook, it's you. The fool. The presence too strange to explain. The body too expendable to protect. But while they ignore you, they speak around you. Near you. Over you. And that's when you learn the truth. You hear everything. The affairs whispered behind velvet curtains. The alliances whispered between wine goblets. The insults muttered just loud enough for you to catch, because they want you to repeat them, to pass them along like a jester-shaped rumor. You're the court's echo chamber, the walking chamber pot for their gossip and grievances. And so you know things. Things they shouldn't have said. Things they think you're too stupid to understand. They don't lower their voices when you're near. They assume you're too ridiculous to retain meaning. But you do. You remember names. You remember debts. You remember everything. You become a ledger no one reads, but everyone fears might be opened. And that's the tightrope. You can hint at what you know. You can joke about it, wrapped in riddles and rhymes. But if you say it too clearly, you're dead. If you say it too softly, they suspect you're hiding something. You're expected to be transparent, but never revealing. Truthful, but never true. And so you balance. On one foot, bells jingling, face painted with mirth, and behind your eyes, calculations. Always watching. Always translating smiles into strategies. Laughter into leverage. Because while you don't belong anywhere, you are everywhere. You sit with no one, but know everyone. You eat last, but see what everyone takes first. You listen while pretending not to hear. You stand just behind the king's throne, close enough to feel the heat of the fire, never close enough to feel safe. The nobles will never trust you. But neither will the servants. To them, you're not one of their own. You live too close to the royals. You speak too freely. You eat their scraps, but you overhear too much. When you enter the servants' corridor, voices drop. When you pass the chapel, the priest frowns. When you meet a visiting knight in the stables, he grips his sword just a little tighter. Everyone sees you. No one claims you. You are too strange, too present, too dangerous. And yet you must be there. At the feast. At the sermon. At the marriage ceremony no one wants but everyone attends. You perform joy at a funeral. You juggle between peace treaties. You roast a duchess on her wedding day, because her father asked you to. You're woven into the tapestry of power, but never embroidered in gold. They pat you on the head, tug your sleeves, laugh as they throw bones or whine at your boots. They test you. Tease you. Use you. And when they tire of you, they don't send you away. They leave you standing there, still smiling, still ringing, until someone needs you again. That is your place. Not at the table. Not among the shadows. Just outside the circle. Not hidden. Not welcome. Just, permanent. You've spent a lifetime mastering things no one takes seriously. You juggle knives while quoting Horace. You compose couplets that slice deeper than swords. You can impersonate every noble at court with such precision that servants drop trays when they hear your voice echo down the corridor. You've trained your memory to hold entire epics, your body to twist, bow, collapse, and leap on cue, all while making it look like a fluke. You've practiced in cellars. Rehearsed in silence. You've failed where no one could see you, and when you returned to the hall, you made it look like you were born with a punchline in your blood. But no one calls it talent. No one calls it art. They call it antics. They call it a gift for giggles. They don't see discipline. They see accident. They don't see years of refinement. They see something silly that happens to amuse them. They don't clap because you're skilled. They clap because you slipped. Because to them, the fool isn't an artist. He's an accident that never stops falling. You could compose a biting satire that exposes court corruption, but it'll be remembered as that funny bit about chickens and taxes. You could perform a perfect recitation of a nobleman's misdeeds wrapped in metaphor, and they'll throw a grape and say, "Make the voice funnier next time." They crave your cleverness, but they fear your meaning. So you learn to hide it. You dull the blade. You bury the punchline. You blur the edges of truth until the whole thing is safe, until it's just noise, just color, just noise in a silly hat. Because if your jokes strike too close to home, you'll find yourself out of favor. Or worse, out of work. You once saw it happen to another fool. He was brilliant. Razor-tongued. He made the room laugh harder than you ever had. And then one night, he mimicked the king's limp too closely. One misplaced twitch. One pause too long. The hall fell silent. 3 days later, he was gone. No funeral. No farewell. Just silence, the kind that follows a lesson. You never saw him again. But you heard the message loud and clear, don't be dangerous. So you step back. You keep the sharpest lines in your head, like arrows that can never be fired. You juggle fruit instead of truth. You make fun of servants instead of senators. You trade in low stakes, because high ones come with sharp ends. And still, your mind races. You could rewrite the scrolls with better lines. You could stage a play that speaks more truth in an hour than the council does in a year. You could be remembered. But that's not the jester's role. The jester isn't supposed to last. He's the spark, not the fire. The echo, not the voice. You make everyone else shine, and fade before anyone realizes the brilliance wasn't theirs. Even when they steal your words, and they do, they repeat them like souvenirs. They'll say, "The Baron once said," quoting you. Or, "That line about sheep and sermons. A bishop wrote it," they'll claim. You'll sit in the corner and smile. Because the fool can't own anything, not land, not titles, not even his own wit. You must always seem like you stumbled into brilliance by mistake. You weren't thinking. You weren't trying. You just happened to be amusing, like a monkey trained to bow, or a parrot that says dirty words. Because the moment they suspect you're doing it on purpose, that you understand how powerful your voice is, the bells become shackles. Your genius becomes treason. So you juggle not just apples and torches, but expectations. Appear clueless, but never dull. Seem clever, but never calculated. Be dazzling, but not threatening. Never outshine. Never outthink. Never remind them that the fool, for all his bells and mockery, is the only one in the room who knows how to tell the truth. Because deep down, they know it. They know you're not just funny. They know you're watching. They know the fool remembers what they want forgotten, jokes about what they want buried, mimics what they hope never sounds like them. And so, they pretend not to hear. They laugh harder than they should, to drown out the discomfort. They shower you with praise, but only when it's hollow. They invite you to speak, but only when they control the audience. And when your voice cuts too close, they tighten the leash. Stick to limericks, they say. No more politics, they warn. Be jovial, fool, they demand. But you keep going. You turn your heartbreak into rhymes. You wrap warnings in riddles. You smile until your jaw aches. Because to stop is to fall. To pause is to be replaced. And to be replaced is to vanish. They remember your jokes. Never your name. You are not a playwright. Not a thinker. Not a man. You are a sound. A jingle. A gesture. You are the living proof that genius, when wrapped in absurdity, can be laughed off before it gets too loud. So you bow. You wink. You dance. And every night, before sleep claims you behind the kitchens, you whisper lines that no one will ever hear. Better than the baron. Sharper than the bishop. Smarter than the king. But dressed like a fool. The feast hall gleams like a painting. Long tables lined with silver goblets, roasted beasts steaming on polished platters, musicians plucking away in the gallery like they were born with strings instead of veins. The scent of spices hangs thick in the air, and laughter spills like wine from every corner. It's a celebration for them. For you, it's open season. The moment the guests arrive, their eyes scan the hall, not for the duke, not for the bride, not for the honored ambassador from the east. No. They search for you. Their personal wind-up distraction. You don't even have time to brace before it begins. Fool. Over here. Do a dance, make it lewd. Sing that song about the friar's beard. And so you begin. Not because you want to, but because if you don't, the mood sours. And in court, a soured mood spoils everything. Especially you. You slip into the rhythm. A wink here, a jest there. You twirl your limbs into ridiculous shapes, perform a joke about the baron's gout, mimic the duchess's accent, all by request. Laughter blooms, but it's never gentle. It's rough. Loud. Pointed. Like arrows with velvet tips. You're not performing anymore. You're being consumed. One noble yanks your sleeve to hear the bells jingle. Another tosses a chicken bone at your chest just to see if you'll flinch. A third demands you impersonate Lord Wensley's squint, while he's sitting 2 chairs down, red with wine and barely able to hold his fork. You do it anyway. Because that's your job. Because that's your survival. If Lord Wensley laughs, you're safe. If he doesn't, you'll spend the next day scrubbing the stables or worse, wondering if your next meal might come with the word dismissed. And the feast rolls on. The music grows louder. The room grows drunker. And you, once the clever centerpiece, become the court's toy. They pass you around with gestures and jests, testing your tolerance like they test the wine. Do the pig again. Fall over like the abbot did. Recite the poem about the queen's teeth, louder this time. You obey. Smile splitting your face like a crack in a mirror. Because if you don't perform, the silence that follows is your fault. If a noble scowls, it's because your joke missed. If a toast falls flat, it's because you weren't quick enough to cover it. If the room grows heavy, you're the pressure valve, the target, the release. And they will pull the lever. Even the children join in. A young lordling tries to trip you as you pass. The guests roar. You fall, deliberately, rolling with exaggerated pain. You stand, grin, and bow. More laughter. More wine. You're not a performer. You're an object of collective humiliation. A court-sanctioned catharsis machine, dressed in motley and mocked with royal consent. And when the feast ends, when the goblets are emptied and the torches dim, they stagger off to soft beds and velvet dreams, and you return to your narrow cot behind the kitchens. Your ribs ache from the fall. Your throat burns from speaking over the music. Your face still holds the mask of mirth because you haven't been allowed to take it off. You sit there, in the dark, still reeling from the noise, not of music or jokes, but of hands grabbing, voices shouting, laughter that sounded like cruelty in a prettier shape. And you think, they didn't laugh with me. They laughed at me. But that's the job, isn't it? Not to be admired. Not to be honored. Just to be useful. You exist to fill the space between awkward silences. You are the thread that holds their nights together. You're the answer to boredom, the soft target for anxiety, the jester-shaped shield against real discomfort. They would never strike a duke. They can't insult a bishop. They won't mock each other, not publicly. But you? You're fair game. And the cruelest part? You're good at it. You can twist an insult into a song. You can take humiliation and wrap it in timing. You can fall without cracking, bleed without breaking. Because you've trained for this. Not for glory, but for endurance. And so the feast becomes a ritual. One that breaks you slowly, night after night, under the golden chandeliers. They eat. They drink. They laugh. And you perform. Until the laughter dies. Until the lights go out. And all that's left is the jingle of your hat echoing off the walls as you limp back to your corner of the world, a little bruised, a little older, and still wearing the same smile that no one asked if you meant. By day, you're a jester. You juggle apples, tell jokes about goats and bishops, absorb insults with grace and deflect boredom with charm. But by night, when the banquet tables are cleared and the torches sputter low, you become something else entirely. You become a ghost. Not the scary kind. Not the haunting kind. The listening kind. You drift through the palace like smoke. Unnoticed. Unremembered. You pass servants whispering in corners, guards grumbling at their posts, nobles slurring secrets into goblets. You hear things you're not supposed to hear, because no one bothers to silence themselves around the fool. They think you're harmless. They think the bells on your ankles cancel out your ears. But they forget something vital: you never stop watching. You were there when the duke cursed the king's latest decree. You stood by when the steward passed a pouch of silver to a cloaked man with no name. You poured wine while two barons spoke of rebellion in riddles and code. They spoke as if you didn't exist. And that's your greatest weapon. They think you're noise, a living decoration. But you're more than that. You're the most well-informed creature in the entire castle. You know who's sleeping with whom, who's stealing, who's lying, and who's planning something that'll get heads chopped if it ever reaches the throne. And it does reach the throne. Because sometimes, the king summons you. Alone. Late. With no guards present. He pours 2 cups, one for him, one for you, though he doesn't expect you to drink. He sits in shadow, crown off, cloak loose, eyes bloodshot from too many days of ruling and too many nights of doubt. And he asks, "Fool, what did the bishop say to the French envoy?" He never looks you in the eye when he says it. He never calls you by name. But he expects an answer, not a performance, not a riddle, not a jest. Truth. And you give it. Or most of it. Because by now, you've learned the game. The king wants honesty, but not too much. He wants information, but never anything that points too directly at him. If your truth implicates his allies, you wrap it in metaphor. If it cuts too close to the crown, you lace it with laughter. Because even the king must pretend that your words are comedy, not intelligence. You say, "The rooster with too many hens has been crowing at foreign gates." Or, "The dog who guards the treasury limps when no one's looking." He sips his wine. Nods. Maybe chuckles. And then he tells you to leave. Just like that. You walk out of the king's chamber knowing you've just passed through fire. If you said too little, he'll think you're useless. If you said too much, he'll think you're dangerous. The balance is razor thin. You live on the edge of implication. Because in this world, information is sharper than any blade. And you? You're holding the court's most potent weapon, truth whispered in safety. But no one trusts you. The nobles smile to your face, but their eyes flick to the shadows when you pass. Servants go quiet when you enter a room. Guards watch your hands like they expect you to pull out a dagger instead of a puppet. They all know, even if they won't admit it, that the jester is never just a jester. You are a rumor magnet. A walking archive of embarrassment. A living, breathing liability. And that makes you the most feared man with no sword. It's a strange thing, to hold so much knowledge and have nowhere safe to put it. You write nothing down. You speak only when asked. You bury secrets beneath layers of slapstick and rhyme. And when someone does press too hard, asks how you knew something or where you heard it, you do what you do best. You play dumb. You cross your eyes. Fumble a rhyme. Trip over your own foot and say, "Was it me? Must have been the ale." And they laugh. Because that's what they expect. But they don't stop watching. Because they know what you know. And what you know could burn the court to the ground. Your dog dies. Quietly. In the night. Curled at your feet like always, but this time colder, stiller. No fanfare. No candlelit vigil. No one notices. No one cares. Except you. But you're not allowed to mourn. You still have to be funny. Because the next morning, the king wakes up irritable. The duchess is bored. There's a visiting noble from Aragon, and the meat's too dry, and the musicians are late, and the air smells like horse, and everyone's annoyed. So you're summoned. You walk into the hall with red-rimmed eyes and a hollow ribcage where your heart used to sit, and before you can breathe, they're already laughing. Tell the one about the baron's belly. Fall over like you did at midsummer. Do something ridiculous. You do. Of course you do. You smile so wide it hurts. You juggle, you sing, you trip on purpose. And no one asks why your voice cracks. Because grief? That's not allowed. Not for you. The steward's wife can sob in the chapel. The knight can drink himself sick and shout at ghosts. Even the queen can lock herself in her chambers and refuse meals when the mood hits. But you? You are not permitted sorrow. If you show it, you fail your function. And if you fail your function, you lose everything. So you bury your pain beneath a pratfall. You turn your heartbreak into a clever rhyme about cows in love. You make a joke of death, then bow as the king chuckles and tosses you a coin. But inside? Inside you are screaming. No one hears it. The walls don't echo for you. Because in this place, the fool doesn't feel. He functions. You perform through illness. Through heartbreak. Through fever and fear and quiet despair. You stumble into the hall with a bleeding toe and cracked ribs from a drunken shove last night, and they say, "Ah. The fool's here. Finally. Cheer us up." So you do. You tell a joke about your own limp. You laugh first, louder than anyone else, just to own it before they can. You dance, even though every step rattles something loose in your spine. And they say, "He's such a good sport." They mean, he knows his place. And your place? Is between their boredom and their fury. You are the buffer. The release valve. The human distraction from a crumbling kingdom and an aging king and an heir no one trusts. You are not allowed to be tired. You are not allowed to be quiet. You are not allowed to be. You are only allowed to perform. Even your silence is suspect. If you don't speak for an hour, someone will whisper, "Is the fool angry?" If you sit still too long, a guard will nudge you and mutter, "You're not planning anything, are you?" If you stare at the fire instead of making faces, a lady will laugh nervously and say, "He's gone odd again." Because your humanity threatens the illusion. And the illusion is sacred. That you are a walking laugh machine. A harmless decoration. An animated spark of mischief and mirth, forever insulated from sorrow. So you fake it. You build your jokes like armor. You stack them until your chest is covered, until your throat is shielded, until there's nothing left exposed. You paint your face with words. And every time someone asks for more, you give it. Because what happens if you don't? They'll find another you. They always do. Another limping boy with clever eyes. Another girl with a strange voice and a knack for rhyme. Another oddity to dress up and call friend until the room grows cold again. You are replaceable. And you know it. So you grin. Through grief. Through rot. Through rage. Because if you stop, if you let even one crack show, the illusion dies. And with it, everything you've built to survive. You are not permitted to be broken. You are only permitted to pretend. So when your dog dies, the one creature in this entire place who sat beside you without expectation, you bury him yourself. Quietly. Behind the kitchens. Near the garden wall where no one ever walks. You whisper a joke to the dirt, just to keep the ritual alive. You laugh through tears so no one asks questions. And then you return to the feast. Because the wine is flowing again. The lords are in a foul mood. The queen's cousin is making threats. And someone says, "Where's the fool? We need a laugh." You take a breath. Step into the light. And smile like you mean it. The king wakes in a foul mood. No one knows why. Maybe he had a dream. Maybe the stew was cold. Maybe the stars tilted wrong over his sleep, and now the world must answer for it. Whatever the reason, the court senses it immediately. His footfall on the marble floor hits a little harder. The way he slouches in his throne has too much weight, like gravity itself fears his disapproval. He sips his wine and spits it back into the cup with a grimace. And every noble, servant, and steward looks in the same direction. You. Because when the king's mood sours, the jester is the first to burn. It doesn't matter that you danced for 6 hours at the last banquet. It doesn't matter that you sang so well last week the Duchess wept from joy. It doesn't matter that your back still aches from being the punchline, literally, at the prince's birthday. Today, the king frowns. And that means you have failed. Somehow. Summon the fool, the steward says. Not because you're needed, but because you're blamed. You enter the throne room to silence so thick it hurts your ears. The nobles won't meet your gaze. The guards pretend they don't know you. Only the king looks up, his eyes heavy with something that doesn't quite name itself. Fool, he says, why haven't I laughed today? No jest will satisfy him. No riddle, no mimic, no rhyme. This isn't about humor. This is about pressure. You are not a person. You are the kingdom's emotional thermostat. If the king stubs his toe, you failed. If a treaty falls through, you didn't juggle enough. If the queen sheds tears, it's because you weren't amusing at the right time. Every sharp word, every failed negotiation, every bad harvest or thunderstorm or sniffle in the nursery, somehow, it circles back to you. Because you are always available, and that means you are always responsible. And never credited. If the king laughs, the wine was good. The musician struck the right chord. The diplomat said something witty. If he doesn't laugh, you missed the mark. You didn't sing loud enough. You didn't fall hard enough. You didn't do the goose voice when you were supposed to. You are the royal scapegoat with bells. And the punishments? They vary. Sometimes it's a scolding. Sometimes a missed meal. Sometimes a backhanded slap that everyone pretends not to see. And sometimes, when the air grows truly dangerous, it's worse. There was a jester before you. Quiet, clever, too sharp for his own good. One evening, the king was grieving. The fool tried a joke about the queen's embroidery, something harmless, something gentle. It didn't land. The next morning, his bells were melted down and turned into chalice trim. No one spoke his name again. You remember that. Every time you open your mouth. Every time you step forward in a tense room. Every time you're summoned not for laughter, but for balance. Because the king doesn't need a friend. He doesn't want comfort. He wants control. And your job is to give him the illusion of joy. So you become more than a performer. You become a performer of serenity. Of deflection. Of composure. You are a walking mask designed to reset the room's temperature. If the king glowers, you giggle. If he curses, you curtsy. If he threatens war, you mime a sword fight with a feather duster. You are the opposite of whatever storm is brewing. But never too opposite. Because too much cheer can seem mocking. Too much calm can seem arrogant. Too much of anything can seem like treason. You walk a line thinner than any blade in the room. And the worst part? They all believe you like it. Ah, the fool, they say. Always smiling, always laughing. Must be nice to have such an easy life. As if joy were your inheritance. As if laughter were a natural spring bubbling up from your cracked soul. They never ask how you feel. Because your feelings are irrelevant. The only emotions that matter are the ones you fix in them. If the king is grieving, you distract him. If the general is furious, you redirect him. If the ambassador is insulted, you flatter them until they forget. You are the salve to every wound, except your own. And no one thanks you. Ever. If the king smiles, he forgets how he got there. If he doesn't, he remembers that you were supposed to make it happen. You are both invisible and indispensable. And the day you miss your cue, the day you falter, or pause too long, or breathe in the wrong rhythm, is the day you learn how quickly a smile can become a noose. So you laugh. Every day. Every hour. Through nausea. Through grief. Through the king's tantrums and the court's treachery and your own crumbling resolve. Because you don't get to say, I'm not up for it today. You say, what would you like to hear, my liege? And hope that whatever comes out next is funny enough to let you live another day. You live in the castle. You sleep beneath the same roof as dukes, barons, and kings. You pass through gilded corridors. You hear the gossip before it becomes scandal. You eat food from the same platters, sometimes, if any is left. You wear clothing tailored by the same hands that dress royalty, though yours is stitched for humiliation, not glory. But you are not one of them. You are not noble. Not knight. Not even servant. You are something else. You are furniture. A fixture. A permanent joke pinned to the edge of history, not a man, but a sound. A flash of color. A shiver of bells. Your title is your cage. Fool. That word follows you like a curse. It is shouted across banquet halls, whispered behind tapestries, scrawled in jest on scraps of parchment. It doesn't matter who you were before. A farmer's son. A clever child. A musician. A poet. All of that was stripped the moment you put on the hat. Now, you are a fool. Always. There is no retirement. No pension. No graceful exit. You don't become master this or lord that. You don't buy land or open a quiet shop on the coast. You don't fade into old age with a garden and a cat and a head full of stories. You get older, yes. Slower. Sorer. But you are still the fool. Your knees crack when you dance. Your voice rasps when you sing. Your teeth are fewer than before. Your memory skips a beat now and then. But they don't notice. Because they never really looked. To them, you are unchanged, because they never saw you clearly to begin with. You are not allowed to age. You are not allowed to fade. You are expected to jingle and tumble and shout with the same vigor you had when you were 16. And when you don't? They whisper. Is the fool losing his spark? He was funnier before. Maybe it's time we found someone younger. It happens quietly at first. Fewer invitations to perform. Less laughter when you enter a room. A longer wait outside the feast hall. Then one day, you wake up and your costume is gone. Taken. Handed to someone else. Some wide-eyed boy with a crooked tooth and nervous hands. He wears the bells. He stumbles in for his first jest, and the court erupts in laughter. And you? You're not summoned. You're not asked. You're not remembered. You become a shadow in the corridor. A name people hesitate to use. A strange man who talks too fast and dresses too loud, muttering to himself about nobles long dead. You are not dismissed. That would require formality. You are simply forgotten. Some fools are retired. Which is a generous word. It means they're no longer fed. No longer housed. No longer needed. Some are sent to the village. Others vanish during a hunting trip. One old jester, years ago, wandered into the woods and was never seen again. No one asked where he went. Because the fool, when no longer funny, is not a tragedy. He's an inconvenience. And still, some stay. You've seen them. The older ones. Stooped, silent, tucked into corners like ghosts. Their hands tremble. Their faces sag. They no longer perform. But they're there. Why? Because they have nowhere else to go. Because after decades of being a fool, there's no person left beneath the mask. You forget how to live outside the performance. You forget how to speak plainly. You forget how to be, without waiting for a laugh. You try to write a letter, and can't remember your real name. You try to tell a story, and it comes out in rhyme. You are not a man. You are an echo. A memory of a joke long past. And worse? You don't even know who you'd be without it. You startle at your own silence. You jingle when you walk, even with no bells. You try to sleep, but the rhythm of applause, or the absence of it, rattles in your skull like wine through hollow stone. You are haunted. Not by spirits. By yourself. And by the realization that you gave everything, wit, pain, love, rage, years, to a court that never once thought to ask, "Are you all right?" Because they don't care. They never did. You were never a person to them. You were a tool. A symbol. A convenient burst of joy between betrayals. And when you're gone, they won't write songs. They won't carve statues. They'll reuse your bells. Give them to the next one. Pin them to his sleeves and call him funny. And he'll smile. Just like you did. And the whole thing will begin again. Because the fool is not a man. The fool is a role. And once you become it, you never leave. You've spent years perfecting your craft. Not just the tumbles and tricks, the songs and smirks. But the things no one applauds. The wordplay that coils like a snake under the floorboards. The satire so subtle it walks through a banquet hall without being noticed, except by the one person it was meant to cut. You know the rhythm of language better than the minstrels. You know timing more intimately than the bell tower. You can dismantle a man's reputation with a single rhyme, and they'll laugh while you do it. Because they think you're too stupid to be dangerous. And that's your power. They call you jester. Fool. Idiot. Buffoon. But you are none of those things. You are a mirror. Polished so bright they can't look away, even when it hurts. You write in verse. You perform in code. You hide your brilliance behind exaggerated accents and floppy hats and jokes about poultry. Because the court only tolerates truth if it's delivered like farce. One time, the bishop gave a sermon on modesty, just after ordering his 4th fur-trimmed cloak. That evening, you stood on a chair and performed a parable about a sheep who wore velvet and declared itself invisible. They laughed. The bishop chuckled along. He didn't realize until the next day. Too late. Another time, you composed a song about a fat cat who owned all the cheese but couldn't stomach milk. You sang it as the tax collector passed through. The room howled. The collector scowled. The queen winked at you. That's how you survive. You say what others cannot. You whisper truth dressed as nonsense. You are the conscience of the court, though no one will admit it. But the price? Is invisibility. Because to be taken seriously would be to lose your shield. The moment they admit your wit, they must admit their own folly. And that cannot happen. So they pretend you are harmless. They laugh at your cleverness, then ignore it. They quote your lines, then deny their meaning. They compliment your delivery, never your depth. You write poems better than the royal bard. But he gets the patronage, and you get a slap on the back and you should have been a scribe, fool. You craft performances with layers, satire, metaphor, irony, but all they hear is, quack quack, when you mimic the baron's voice. And heaven help you if you're too good. One night, you performed a monologue that made the Duchess weep. Real tears. She said you reminded her of her childhood nurse, long buried. The next day, the steward told you, stick to comedy. You're upsetting people. They want your genius, but only if it's hidden. They want your brilliance, but only if they can call it lucky. Because if the fool becomes wise, the king becomes vulnerable. And in court, vulnerability is not forgiven. So you play the game. You fumble your words just enough. You trip on purpose. You make a crude joke after every sharp one, just to soften the blow. You put a chicken on your head after you quote Cicero. Because if you don't, if you lean too far into truth, they'll remember you're dangerous. And dangerous fools don't last long. The man who taught you, years ago, made that mistake. He was sharp. Too sharp. He mocked a noble's mistress once with a line so biting it drew blood. They laughed. But not for long. A week later, he was gone. Drowned in a fountain. Called an accident. Bells still tied to his boots. You learned. You learned to hide your blade in bread. To tuck your wisdom behind pratfalls. To wrap every truth in so much absurdity they think you're drunk or daft or both. You learned how to whisper your brilliance. And still, it leaks through. Because true skill can't stay buried forever. The chambermaid quotes your lines at market. The cook hums your song while gutting fish. Even the queen, cold, careful, calculating, repeats your riddles when she thinks no one hears. And you smile. Not because it brings you joy. But because it proves you were right. They heard you. They all did. They just chose not to admit it. Because in a kingdom of glass egos and rusted swords, the sharpest threat isn't a rebel or a rival. It's a man in bells. With a memory like iron. A tongue like a whip. And the restraint to laugh instead of strike. And that is your final act of brilliance, the one they'll never give you credit for. You held up a mirror. And let them keep calling it a joke. By day, you're a jester, flinging jokes, juggling apples, absorbing insults with a painted-on grin. But by night? You're something else. Something far more dangerous. You're the only person in the palace who moves freely between rooms without being stopped. Between nobility and servant, clergy and cook, guard and guest. You are tolerated by all, trusted by none, watched by few. Because no one fears what they don't respect. And that is your cloak. Your gift. Your weapon. You're the court's wandering shadow. A blur of bells and banter who drifts through silence like incense, invisible in plain sight. You carry wine to the bishop and catch the corner of his whisper to the ambassador. You pour ale for the baroness and notice her glance, twice, at the steward's son. You kneel to pick up the goblet someone dropped, and you hear everything. Affairs. Bribes. Insults. Blackmail. The court is a play without end, and you're the only one who never leaves the stage. Everyone else has masks. You wear yours openly. They lie with subtlety. You lie in jest. They use coded letters. You use riddles. And yet, somehow, you know more than any of them. Because they don't think you matter. And that is a mistake. You remember everything. Who insulted who at last winter's feast? Which knight disappeared for 3 nights and returned with a limp and a lie? Which servant left crying? Which noble laughed too hard when the air choked on wine? You remember when the king's cousin looked too long at the queen. When the bishop flinched at the word gold. When the steward signed a name that wasn't his. You remember. Because memory is how you survive. Sometimes, the king calls you in late, long after the guests have gone. He leans close and says, "Tell me what Lord Fenric said last night." Every word. And you do. Not because you want to. But because the wrong answer might get you whipped. And the right one might get you summoned again. The king doesn't ask his council what they heard. He asks you. Because you were the only one no one bothered to whisper around. Because you were, just, the fool, jingling by with a grin and a tune and your ears wide open. But the king's memory is short. And if your answer displeases him, if the truth is too ugly, he might say you lied. Or worse, insulted someone. And in court, insult is a crime. So you learn the second layer of your trade. Discretion. You speak in riddles. You say, the weasel nibbles where the cheese is soft, and the king laughs, until he doesn't. Because he knows. You always know. And if you know too much, they will silence you. Some fools became spies. Some became corpses. One jester you knew once, clever man, sharp tongue, quicker brain, vanished after suggesting, lightly, that 2 noblemen had been conspiring. Just a joke, he said. A game of shadows. They dragged him to the river at dawn. His bells washed ashore for 3 days. So you keep your tongue sharp, but your teeth hidden. You speak plainly only in dreams. You practice honesty like a dance, always sidestepping the fatal beat. And yet, you can't stop listening. It's in your bones now, to watch, to calculate, to file every word away like gold coins under floorboards. Because one day, that knowledge might save you. Or doom you. Or both. You're the only one who knows the full story behind the knight's sudden illness. The queen's strange late-night walks. The royal heir's hatred of his tutor. You know which guards are bribed. Which tapestries hide listening holes. Which lords kiss which hands under the table. You know too much. And still they feed you scraps and call you lucky. Because they think you're harmless. A man in a funny hat. A voice that juggles. A pair of dancing feet with no spine, no steel, no spine. They think you are soft. But you? You are iron wrapped in velvet. Memory dressed in bells. Truth disguised as laughter. And someday, when the kingdom falls, and the nobles tear at each other like dogs over bone, they will turn to the last man left standing, not the knight, not the priest, not the prince. They will look to the fool. And realize, too late, that the man they ignored was the only one who saw everything. You've lived your life surrounded by people. Feasts, weddings, coronations, royal births, funerals. You've stood at the edge of every major moment, face painted, hat jingling, lips curled in a grin. Your voice has echoed off marble columns and soot-streaked hearths. Your jokes have filled rooms like smoke, drifting into corners, settling in the minds of kings and killers alike. And yet, when your time comes, you die alone. Not in a blaze of glory. Not in a bed of silk. Not with anyone holding your hand. Not even in scandal. Just, quietly. A cough that won't go away. A step missed on a cold stone stair. A chill that settles in your bones and never leaves. The cook finds you, maybe. Or a scullery boy sent to find a mop. You're slumped in your narrow cot, under a pile of blankets that never truly warmed. Your costume neatly folded nearby, not out of vanity, but habit. Because even dying, you were trying not to make a mess. There is no funeral. No procession. No bard sings of you. No herald shouts your name. You are not a knight. You are not a priest. You are not royalty. You are the fool. And fools are not remembered. The court doesn't mourn. It moves on. Another jester is already being measured for bells. The chamberlain mutters about replacing the entertainment. The queen wonders, idly, if the new one might be taller. The king doesn't notice at all. Your absence is a space filled with laughter from someone else. And yet, somewhere, someone remembers. The old steward, now half mad, chuckles at the empty stool in the corner, convinced he hears you humming. A guard mentions your riddles once, unprompted, staring at his reflection in a goblet. A page finds a slip of parchment under your cot, a poem, or a plan, or a list of names with tiny drawn crowns beside them, and burns it, just in case. Your bells, once bright, now dull, are dropped in a drawer and forgotten. Until the next fool finds them. And for a moment, just a moment, they pause. They touch the worn leather strap. They hear the faintest jingle. They wonder, not aloud, whose these were. But they never ask. Because fools don't have heirs. You had no land to pass on. No children to speak your name. No stained glass window to immortalize your face. You were never meant to leave a legacy. And yet, there is something left. Something in the way nobles flinch when someone laughs a little too honestly. Something in the unease that settles when satire lands too close to home. Something in the court's instinct to hush itself when the new fool speaks a little too clearly. They remember you. Not your name. Not your face. But your presence. The discomfort you caused. The truths you slipped between rhymes. The way you forced the powerful to hear themselves, if only for a second, and feel the weight of their own absurdity. You were never meant to be the center. But somehow, you were the spine. The glue between factions. The pressure valve in times of war. The echo chamber turned inside out. The only one who could say it, and survive, for a while. You didn't wear a crown. But you carried one in your mouth. You didn't lead armies. But you made generals laugh when their hands shook. You didn't hold power. But you held attention. And in a world where even kings are forgotten, that is something. So yes, your death was quiet. But your life was a whisper in every ear that mattered. A shadow on every feast. A jingle behind every political decision. You were overlooked, underfed, mocked, dismissed. And you outlived them all. Not in years. But in memory. Because in the end, the fool wasn't a joke. He was the warning. The conscience. The truth in a funny hat. And centuries later, when someone asks, what happened to the old fool, the answer is always the same. He vanished. But the echoes? They still laugh. And somewhere, always, a bell rings.